On behalf of Folk, I respectfully recognise the traditional owners and custodians of the Ku-ring-gai people of the Eora Nation and pays its respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, elders past and present. Folk aspires to learn from traditional knowledge and customs so that together we can protect Ku-ring-gai's environment and cultural heritage. Dick Smith is one of Australia's most well-known and respected personalities. He is regularly voted among Australia's most trusted individuals. So much so that in 2005 the National Trust nominated him as one of Australia's living treasures. A businessman, entrepreneur, adventurer, philanthropist, aviator, and a passionate advocate for the environment. Dick is active in many fields of public life. He's a passionate supporter of environmental and conservation efforts, and since 1995 has been chairman of the Australian Geographic Society. In 1982, he was a central figure in the campaign to stop the Franklin River Dam, one of the most significant environmental campaigns in Australian history. Dick is a supporter of many charities and individuals in need. In recognition of this, he was honoured as Australian of the Year in 1986. And you would well know, as a businessman, he is best known for founding Dick Smith Electronics and founding Australian Geographic magazine and the launching of Dick Smith Foods. As an adventurer, Dick has achieved many world firsts. First solo around the world in the helicopter, first round the world aeroplane flight landing at each pole, the first crossing of an Australian by balloon in 1993, and the first trans-Tasman balloon crossing in 2000. His latest interest is in initiating a debate on Australia's population policy, sparked by his concern for the future his grandchildren will face. Late last year, Dick published an advertisement in the Sydney Morning Herald and other papers directing questions to the Greater Sydney Commissioner, Lucy Turnbull, regarding his concerns about the proposed enormous population growth, its effect on housing, Sydney's livability and our way of life, and that for future generations, a topic that he will be speaking about tonight. Would you please give Dick Smith a wonderful Ku-ring-gai welcome.
Thank you, Cathy. Thank you. It's wonderful to be back here again. 7 years, I think. But basically 7 years of failure, because I've got absolutely nowhere. And you mentioned the advertisement directed at Lucy Turnbull. I spent $50,000 on those ads, and you know what? I got not one answer from her. But what was even worse is not one journalist was game to do an article, ask her the questions and write an article. And one of the reasons for that is that if you work for the media in this country, you're pretty well obsessed with growth. And the driving problem that we have at the present time is that our system of capitalism, which has certainly served us very well, and someone like myself have exploited it to do extremely well out of it, that it's not sustainable because it requires perpetual growth. And no one is game to admit that we actually have to change to a different system. I don't quite know what that system is, but I know that eventually we'll have to live in balance. You mentioned the Aboriginal people lived in this country for up to 60,000 years with less than 1 million people here, which is probably the carrying capacity of Australia. And they lived a very simple life. We have 7 million on this earth at the moment. We can only have 7 million because 2 million are almost starving. And the 7 million is predicted to go to 10 million. 7 billion, sorry, the 7 billion is predicted to go to 10 or 12 billion which will mean even poorer people. And let me explain to you, because as a capitalist I can understand this. You hear our politicians talking about growth. Whenever they say growth, put a word in front of it, perpetual or endless growth. That's what they're saying. They don't actually say endless growth, because most people would say, oh, that doesn't sound possible. So when you hear a politician say growth, put in the word endless in front of it, endless growth, and then change the word growth to greed, endless greed, because that's what it really is. And I want to read a couple of really disturbing things to you. This is a statement by Bernie Fraser, former head of the Reserve Bank. He says, Australia is approaching a danger point where the gap between rich and poor becomes so vast it could have awful, far-reaching consequences at every level in Australian society. The reason he said that is that just recently the figures came out that the wealthiest 1% of Australians own more than the bottom 70%. So that's the wealthiest 1%, which I'm embarrassed to be one of. We own more money than the bottom 14 million Australians. Of course, if you want to look world-wise, the 8 wealthiest billionaires in the world have the same wealth as half the world's population. 8 people equivalent to 3.4 billion people. And I often mention the pitchforks will come out if we're not careful. This is a comment by Nick Honaha, a US billionaire. And he says, no society can sustain this kind of rising inequality. In fact, there is no example in human history where the wealth accumulated like this and the pitchforks didn't eventually come out. And that's what I'm amazed, that my fellow wealthy don't seem to understand, that you can't do what we're doing, and that is have this incredible variation in wealth. The other problem is that the cake is a finite size. People seem to be amazed that the United States, which was one of the wealthiest countries on earth per capita, when I was a kid in the 50s, Americans were wealthy and Australians were poor. It's almost the opposite now, and no one links to what it is. America has 330 million people. You're stretching that wealth amongst 330 million people. Yes, there's certainly a lot of money for the 8 at the top, but if you spread it out even reasonably fairly, it means that most people are going to get less. And I happen to believe that Australia could have 100 million people. By the way, at our present growth rate, 1.7%, the highest in the developed world, mainly coming from ridiculous immigration levels. 1.7% it is per year. If we have that until the end of this century, when my little granddaughter is most likely to be alive, we'll have 100 million people here. Now, could we have 100 million? Probably. We're ingenious creatures. I can imagine them all living like termites in high rise. We'd have vertical conveyors with laser diodes growing food. But without any doubt, probably 30 or 40 million would be incredibly poor. And that's what's happened in the United States. In 30 years, they haven't been able to put up the minimum wage in real terms. Their minimum wage is about $7.50 an hour. That's less than half hours. And so if you increase the population, there's a benefit for the wealthy. Two reasons why the wealthy are pushing this incredible immigration and growth. For a start, it keeps wages down, and it's working. For the first time in the last 5 years, our gross domestic product per head is going down. We've gone past the sweet point. And have lots of people applying for jobs, it keeps the wages down. One of the beaut things about Australia is that we have shared the wealth. Our minimum wage, over $20 an hour, is over twice that of the Americans. Mainly, I think, because of strong unions in this country that have allowed that to happen. And I remember when I was growing Dick Smith Electronics in the 70s, the tax then, the company tax was 50% more than it is now. And the personal tax was about 30% more, but I did well, and Jerry Harvey did well, and John Singleton did well. But this incredible scam was put on by the wealthy. They said, using the most highly paid lobbyists in the world, they said, oh, if you can bring the taxes down for us wealthy, we'll actually put more money back into our businesses and employ more people, and everyone will be wealthier. It's a lie. Because if you look, the wealthier have got wealthier, but generally typical Australians are poorer. It's a complete lie. But now we have our Prime Minister. What's he doing? He's going to be reducing the tax on the wealthy because he believes, no doubt, that by doing that we will have a better community. It's interesting, there's no plan when it comes to population. I know why. A typical Aussie family can have 20 kids. None do, because families decide on what's a sensible limit. Some might have 5 or 6 kids, some 1 or none. It averages out at the moment about 1.8 kids to show that Australian families are sensible. It's interesting, in Japan, the birth rate is less than replacement level because Japanese women are sensible and they know that's a tiny country for 120 million people. Japan's going to go from 120 million to 90 million people. But what are we doing? As I mentioned, at the growth rate we've got at the moment, we're going to end up at 100 million. Now, most of my wealthy business colleagues all say, oh no, there's lots of growth left. They mean while they're alive. I remember Rupert Murdoch writing back to me and saying, Dick, I agree with you, 100 million might be too many, but there's a lot of growth left. Once again, he means while he's alive. Because a very easy way of making more money is to have population growth. And a great way for politicians to cover up on the fact that they're not giving us a better way of life is to show that the gross domestic product increases by 1 or 2 or 3% per year. And we don't have a proper measure. Canada has the General Progress Indicator, which looks at things other than the GDP was a wartime measure, of course, and we're still using that. Now, here's going to be the difficulty. I've got nowhere. I've been on this for about 8 or 9 years now, and I've completely failed. And it's going to be a disaster if it goes on that way for our grandchildren. That's my self-interest. Won't affect me. I'm 73 years of age and I am in that 1%. I don't feel so much guilty being in the 1% of the wealthiest, but I do feel guilty that equivalent to the 1% is the bottom 70%. That's completely wrong. That's not the Australian way. We should be sharing that wealth better. It's interesting, I've got my document here I'll be putting on the website within the next few weeks. It's introducing a new powerful public think tank. Policies for the Dick Smith Fair Go Group, an economy that benefits everyone, not just the 1%. And I've come up with the ideas so we can spread the wealth again. But it's going to be really hard because the wealthy are powerful and they have tremendous political lobbying powers. And as I mentioned to you, that if the population keeps increasing, there are more people looking for jobs, and so it keeps the wages down, and there are more customers. But because the cake is about the same size, the Australian cake no longer comes from building little gadgets in factories where you need lots of people sitting there. We need lots more people to come in, immigrants, to build these things. It's changed forever. With robotics and with automation, you actually don't need more people. In fact, just about every problem we have in the world is going to be harder to fix with more people. And so you don't need more people, but the problem is our wealth comes primarily from agriculture, which is fantastic, primary industry, and it comes from our mineral resources. And it's finite. And so in effect, double the population, and other than the wealthy, everyone will be worth half as much. It's as simple as that. So why do we have such staggering immigration? And it's the highest in the developed countries. There's no one who's anywhere near us. Our immigration is about 200,000 a year. And that's 5 jumbo jets a week. They'd come in full and obviously must go out empty because people are flying in here. And yes, we should try and share our fortune. And so my belief, we could certainly do better in the humanitarian intake. We could go from 10,000 to 20,000. But our immigration of 200,000 should come down to about 70,000. That would be still very high by developed world standards. It should be totally non-discriminatory. The interesting thing is if we bring it down to about 70,000, we'll stabilise our population at about 26 million because our birth rate, as I mentioned, is pretty well stable. Look around the world, 10 out of the 8 out of the 10 wealthiest countries' GDP per capita in the world all have populations of less than 10 million. It's only Australia and America that have a higher GDP, and as I mentioned, both of us are going backwards. It's interesting, the wealth, I always thought the wealth extremes were in America. I didn't realise they were here. Harry Triguboff's worth $10 billion, but he's not known as a philanthropist. Isn't that amazing? It's great to see that Twiggy Forrest is now giving money away, and also he's doing it without claiming a tax deduction, which is wonderful. That's the type of example we need. It's interesting, some of the wealthy have said to me, oh, well, Dick, we're not like you, we do our giving secretly. Well, first of all, I wonder if they do. But it's interesting, it's the attitude of the wealthy how they're superior, because if you work for one of the billionaires and you get a normal wage, you probably volunteer. You're probably in the church group or the sporting association or the bushfire brigade, Mothers Club, Scouts. Now, you can't wear a balaclava when you're volunteering, so people can know that you're a do-gooder. You're trying to help. Whereas what the wealthy say is, oh, we're so superior, we can do it secretly. Well, for a start, I don't know if I believe that it's true. It's interesting, in looking for this fair go group, I'm absolutely amazed to find that if you're a billionaire worth $10 billion and you die, you leave the whole $10 billion to your kids. Nothing goes back to the country. I think that's amazing, nothing shared. Now, those who have signed the Bill Gates pledge and Twiggy Forrest 1 are going to give most of their money away when they die. But from what I can make out, 90% of the billionaires will keep their money. And as our American millionaire mentioned, the pitchforks will come out. You only have to look at the world. In the past, it's as if we almost never learn. That if you end up with tremendous wealth and then people who don't have jobs, and one of my concerns about the very large immigration levels, I have a feeling many of these people after 2 or 3 generations will have never had a job. And if you want to have dissatisfied people who turn into terrorists, that's the way that that can happen. Now, we live in this wonderful northern side of Sydney. I was a free-range kid, born in Roseville, Dudley Avenue in Ku-ring-gai. And my dad and mum, dad was a salesman, mum was a housewife, very proud to be a bloody good housewife too, homemaker, looked after us kids. And Dad bought a block of land in East Roseville and paid off a house during his lifetime there. That's impossible now. Now, I think it's a sacred right that a young family should be able to buy a house with a backyard with some dirt, for the kids to get mixed up in the dirt. Now in Parramatta, they're building a 15-storey high school. No doubt the kids will come from the 40-storey home units, living like termites, into the high school. They'll never actually play on the dirt at all. And that's what's going to happen when you go to 100 million. Lucy Turnbull didn't answer me. I couldn't believe it. I thought she would say, because I said to her, what's the plan? If it's 5 million now, then 10 million, then 100 million, then a trillion? There's no plan. And it's pretty clear that we're passing the sweet point. Try and drive around now. It's almost impossible to drive. And to see our beautiful Federation houses being knocked down for little boxy units and so forth, it's complete madness, because it's only helping the 1%. The 1% are becoming unbelievably wealthy, whilst the 70% are basically becoming poorer. And that's unacceptable. Now, I'm amazed that we can't do something about this. Our politicians are good people, but I think they're completely besieged by the wealthy with the extraordinary lobbying that goes on. And they have probably been convinced, they've been deluded into believing that if you keep reducing the taxes on the wealthy, that we wealthy then will employ more people and trickle-down effect will mean everyone is better off. It's clear in the last 30 years that's not happening. It's the exact opposite. Now, can we do something about it? Well, we're a democracy, and I'm hoping we can. It's interesting, when it comes to the population issue, 8 out of 10 Aussies I talk to, if I walk down the street, will say, oh, Dick, we agree with you about population. And I supported Will Burke in the Sustainable Population Party at the last election, and he got 1.2% of the votes. Very, very difficult. In other words, because obviously there are so many other issues that are on. Let me talk a little bit about housing affordability. A house used to be something that you would invest in to give yourself a roof over your head. When my dad and mum paid off that house in East Roseville, it's around about now 5 times less affordable to buy that same house for a young couple. And that's wrong. One of the reasons, by the way, it's so unaffordable is that we've turned it into a way of making money. With the negative gearing and with the capital gains tax exemption, we've turned it into a way of making money. And so instead of young people starting a business like I did when I invested $610 into Dick Smith Electronics, they're buying houses and negatively gearing them. But houses don't actually employ and produce people. And it's quite ridiculous because you get greater tax advantages buying a house compared to starting your own business. No wonder young people are not taking the risk and starting the business. But how do we ever fix it? Because 70% of us now have houses and are benefiting. Some of our politicians have 12 and 14 and 15 investment houses negatively geared. And of course, if you've got a house and it's negatively geared, you don't want the values to go down. So you want to keep the population pressure cooker going. But I have a feeling that there's going to be an enormous crash. And that would be terrible if it happened. I often think, look around in nature, and just about everything lives in wonderful balance. Down on my farm, we have these wonderful pink and grey cockatoos and the wonderful sulphur-crested cockatoos. I'm told by the naturalists that the numbers are the same for tens of thousands of years. They just live in beautiful balance. Whereas we humans, if we replicate anything in nature, it's locusts. Locusts breed in the billions and then starve by eating each other. And the whole system collapses and then it starts again. But we've got an intelligence and we've got common sense. You think we'd be able to do something about that. I look here and I see the houses going and the high-rise going in, and it's almost as if people don't doubt that you have to keep growing. There's no political party, even the Greens don't have a population policy. When I asked Bob Brown, he said, oh, well, if to have a population policy, you've got to talk about immigration and we'll be declared racist. But that's ridiculous. It's nothing to do with racism. To go from 7 billion to 10 billion or 12 billion in this world, it's too many of any colour, creed, religion, it doesn't matter what you talk about. I understand we're using about 1.5 times the world's resources each year now. We're ingenious creatures, but the only way we could ever have that number is as it is now, where you've got 2 or 3 billion incredibly poor. Now, can I come up with a positive? I'm glad it's not young people in this audience. I give talks to schools and I'm desperately trying to think of something I can say that can be positive. The greed, it's interesting, the wonderful company I started, Dick Smith Electronics, I sold it because it got too big for me at 40 shops. Woolworths expanded it, they did very well out of it, took it up to about 100 shops, which it would be booming today and employing thousands of Australians. But the greed and the pressure, not just the greed, the pressure on the Woolworths board from the mum and dad shareholders, people like us and the pension funds, where's the growth? You've got to have growth, 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 growth. If the shares don't go up, you'll get the sack. Managing director, board, you'll be thrown out. Listen to Alan Kohler on the ABC every night. He goes up a pitch when he talks about growth. And if any other shares are going down, that must be bad. And so what Woolworths did was open 300 shops. And then they sold it to a merchant bank who opened 350 shops, and it was far too many. The greed got them. And the whole thing collapsed with people losing their wages, their gift certificates and all the rest. And it was so completely unnecessary. And I look at the moment, that's what's happening with our wonderful free enterprise system. I call it extreme capitalism. It's getting to the limits of growth. And one day I was taken aside. I have this little company, Dick Smith Foods, which I'm very proud of. I copied Paul Newman's, and we support Australian farmers, and we give the profits away, and it's battling. It used to do 80 million turnover, now it's about 19 million. It'll probably eventually fail, mainly because we don't get a lot of support. The Woolworths and Coles try and keep us on the shelf. We're normally in a bad position, but most of us, when we go to the supermarket, are not feeling that patriotic. We just want to buy the food and get home, sort of thing. And so our food doesn't sell that well. But to look at that company and to realise that we can't sell our own food here because a company called Aldi came here, which it's brilliant, it's extreme capitalism. It hardly has any staff. A lot of my friends here on the north side go to Aldi because it's cheaper. Its formula is that they've worked out that instead of having about 100 staff for a big supermarket, they can operate with about 20. And that means, of course, the food is cheaper, but what do you do with the other 80 young people who are not employed? And as I mentioned, I was taken aside by one of the chiefs at Woolworths, and he said to me a number of years ago, Dick, you're absolutely right what you're saying about extreme capitalism. I don't like my job anymore. He said, in the past, we had an ethos that the farmers could make $1, the small producer could make $1, and Woolworths would. He said, that's all gone. He said, because we have to compete with Coles. Coles got this brilliant, ruthless chief executive from Scotland who ended up getting $16 million a year wage salary with bonuses. Imagine that, $16 million a year, because he was completely ruthless and kept saying to his buyers, no, that's no good. You've got to push the farmer down. Whatever price he gives you, just knock another 10% off and say, do you want the business? Otherwise, we're not going to sell your product. And that's what happened. And then Woolworths had to match it. The most amazing thing is that food is cheaper than it's ever been. And what's happening? Our young kids are getting obese. So I often think, when I look at Aldi coming here, and Aldi's a wonderful example of extreme capitalism. It's a private organisation, whereas if you buy from Coles and Woolies, the profits are shared amongst tens of thousands of Australians and super funds and pension funds and so forth. Now, Aldi's owned by one of the wealthiest families on this earth, the Albersh family. The father who started the business now dead, so it's the kids who are fighting over the money. And I met the chief executive and said, why did you come here? And he said, is it just ultimate greed? You're already billionaires. And he said, we had to because our competitors are building up, and unless we have the same efficiencies of scale. And my prediction is that in the end we won't have Coles and Woolworths. We will just have Aldi and probably Walmart. German-owned Aldi with all the money going to Germany, to the kids of the Albersh father, and Walmart with all the money going to America. And we'll look back and think, what happened to our wonderful Australian way of life, and why have we got 20% unemployed? And why is it that our kids don't have jobs? That'll be the reason for it. And that's because we've allowed this system of capitalism to go too far, to go to those extremes. Now, we're a democracy. I say I hope you look up my website, just key in a few weeks' time, Dick Smith Fair Go Group. And what I'm saying is that we're a democracy and we can say, no, we don't want this. Do you actually build in some rules, almost rules against globalisation? It's interesting, Singapore has them and China has them, where they've said, no, we don't want to go to the extremes. And you have to admit, you have to have leaders that say it's going to cost us a bit more, but we're a wealthy country. Can we pay a bit more to have jobs for our kids and to have a good way of life? I'm hoping we can do that. Otherwise, as our American friend says, it's happened before, the pitchforks will come out again. Thanks for listening to me. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Oh,
thank you.
Yes, you'll just stay here.
I will, right.
Very wonderful speech, Dick. Thank you very much. Now, he has agreed to take a few questions. We've got a roving microphone here. Ursula will bring it round. So I'd like to take some questions from our members first, please. And then we'll take some questions from visitors.
Thank you. I'll stand in here again.
Yes, John Townend.
Thanks, Kathy. Thanks, Dick, very much. Terrific. I just don't know why you're such a lone voice. And I don't really think you're failing because you're keeping in there. You just have, somehow we've got to get more people on your side. I don't understand why organisations, for example, like the Grattan Institute, and there are others in this country who profess to be independent and to be able to look at the topics like this, don't come out with other supporting what you're saying.
It's amazing. The universities, if you do economics at university, you're taught, in effect, perpetual growth. And then they've got the science department saying that's impossible, but they don't talk to each other. So you've got all these young people going out learning economics and perpetual growth when it's impossible. And that's the universities. And one of the statements I should have said is the human power to self-delude seems to be unlimited when it comes to those things. Yes.
Hi, John Bellamy, SaveTheTreesAndAnimalsCampaign.com. I agree with absolutely everything you say, and you're such an inspiration. And just two questions. Have you considered starting your own political party? And number two, have you considered buying one of these radio stations that are going to be up for sale?
Yes. The most common question I get asked is, Dick, when are you going to go into politics and we want you to be Prime Minister? I've always said no, not until I can be dictator. But look, the chance of being able to start a political party at my age, 72, it takes, in my business career, it's normally the third person I've got into a job who's successful at it, and it takes 3 years to get that person. So to build a group of capable people takes a long time, and I just don't have time to do that. What this group, the Dick Smith Fair Go group, is going to do, it's going to put pressure on the existing political parties, because I believe if we could get a number of members, 100,000, or Get Up has 1 million members, then we could start getting one of the parties to have a policy on sustainability, that type of thing. And so that's what I'm planning to do at the moment, to see if I could get enough people who would come on board. What I've put here is some quite ruthless changes to our tax system. See, when I made my money, as I mentioned, the taxes were far higher in the 70s. John Singleton, Jerry Harvey and myself were paying over 50% company tax and higher than that in personal tax. We all did very well. We need to go back to that. And for that you need a political party which is strong enough to stand up for the 1%, because the 1% are incredibly powerful. The money is just unlimited. And I've got one statement in here which is just incredibly disgusting about tax avoidance. And these are so-called reputable companies. 48 Australian millionaires earned 118 million. They paid accountants and lawyers 22.2 million to reduce their taxable income to zero and pay tax of zero. So can you imagine that? This is how lack of ethics we've got in the big end of town. And I know some of these people, these tax advisors, are earning up to $10 million a year each in salaries. And I mean, it's just disgusting what they're doing. I'll read that again. 48, this is from the tax department, from the ATO. 48 Australian millionaires earned 118 million, paid accountants and lawyers 22.2 million, because they took tax deduction for that, from the 118 million, to reduce their taxable income to zero, to pay tax of zero. Now, are these people so stupid? That happened, I understand, in the 1780s in France. And people rebelled. And so presumably these idiots, these wealthy 1%, are doing it so they can hand their kids billions of dollars. they're not going to be handing their kids a country that's worth living in. That's what I don't understand. It's so basic. If you remember, Kerry Packer, everyone laughed and said, wasn't it wonderful when he said you'd be a fool to pay a cent more tax than you need to. It's interesting, I've always had a completely different view. I was really lucky. When I got home, my first job was in a factory at Western Electronics at Sydenham, and it was £6 a week or something, and I got home and I didn't have £6 because I had my root certificate, and they'd taken the tax out. And I said to my dad, oh, I've taken the tax out. And my dad said to me, luckily, he said, never complain about, that's why our country's so fantastic, the schools and this and that. And I had a completely different attitude, obviously, to Kerry Packer. And I remember when Dick Smith Electronics made $1 million profit one year, I was pretty embarrassed. I didn't tell everyone. But the following year, it was when the company tax was 45%, we paid $1 million tax. So I got all the staff together and I said, you should be proud we're paying $1 million tax this year. And that's the crazy thing. Because of what my dad said to me, I've always been proud of the tax I've paid. Whereas you've got these people who spend their whole life. Imagine, I know a billionaire who pays no tax. Another friend I knew, he had to go and live, he made all this money, and so he had to spend 7 months of the year in Monaco. Because he said, how do you pay the taxes here, Dick? And I said, well, I pay them. I still have half left. I'm wealthy. But he was so obsessed with not... And one of the things is that the leadership doesn't say you should be proud. In Norway, every bit of tax you pay is transparent. It's published. You can go on your iPhone and look up the tax that your neighbour pays or the billionaire pays. How would you like bringing that in here? Whoa. A lot of people wouldn't like it, but that's, if I become dictator, that's what we'll be doing. Yeah. Yes. One.
Howard Witt, Citizens Climate Lobby. A minute ago you spoke about economists not listening to scientists. I think they're perhaps not listening to scientists with respect to the impacts of climate change. And I'd like your take on how population, agricultural productivity will be affected as the 100-year event becomes a 1 year.
Well, it's incredibly simple. If it's human-induced climate change, which I believe it is, so you're then going to double the population. So you can have more humans. So if we're talking about now going from coal to gas, which is 40% less carbon, but wait for it, we're going to go from 24 million to 100 million. We're going to increase our population by 4 times. The world is allegedly going from 7 to 10 or 12 billion, and we're going to raise the poor people's standard of living, and you're going to reduce carbon. Obviously, and this is the most amazing thing, at all of the climate conferences, but especially Copenhagen, which if you remember was the reason I made the documentary, which we filmed here 7 years ago, because my daughter rang me up and said, Dad, at Copenhagen, why aren't they talking about the elephant in the room? And I said, what's that? And she said, population. If it's human-induced, how can you not talk about population? But nobody does. It's the most, well, you do, I'm sure, and sensible people do, but most people don't. Do you realise I saw a figure, Sam, was it 28 or 48% people who doubt climate?
48.
Yeah, 48% of Aussies doubt that climate change is human-induced. 48%. And that's because of an active disinformation campaign by the wealthy. You've got to understand that that's what it is. And I have little doubt. I've done 5 flights around the world at low level, at 500 feet. I came back from my first flight in 1983, and the first thing I said, it's on tape and it's in the papers, I said, can't believe the damage we're doing in the world, that it doesn't have any effect. I'd never heard of climate change, and I wasn't eating carbon. I just saw, from my little helicopter, the incredible clearing that was going on. You'd fly for days in smog, and I just couldn't believe it. And it's obvious that we are a plague on this earth, and we're going to affect it. And the fact is, we're not doing anything about it. I'll tell you why. Because our whole economic system is dependent on incredibly cheap fossil fuels. And to change that is going to be incredibly difficult. I've done a lot of work on solar energy. The car I drove here today, it's a Nissan Leaf, it's completely solar powered. When they delivered it to me, it had zero carbon. I said, what rubbish? It's going to be plugged into a coal power station. So I've now got, 4 years ago I put solar cells on the roof and a huge big battery bank, and it has never touched the power station mains ever since. It's completely run from the roof. But hold on, don't clap too much, because you have to be Dick Smith to afford it. The cost is 4 times that of a petrol vehicle per kilometre. 4 times. And this is one of the problems, that it's not so much that solar energy is expensive, it's the fact that fossil fuels are being sold far too cheaply. First of all, they're going to run out, and secondly, we don't put in the price of the damage that we're doing. One of the problems, if you wanted to go completely renewable, it's going to affect poor people more. My estimate is that it will double electricity bills, and I've done a lot of work on this, because you'll hear claims that we can go solar and we can use pump storage, or we can use batteries and so forth, because solar is intermittent. And you can have 5 days of no sun, so you need 5 days of storage. But batteries are very expensive. And all the calculations I've done show that if we wanted to put in a complete renewable system, the electricity price would be about double what it is now. It's about $2,000 per year, $1,600 per year per family on approximately. It would be over $3,000 a year. And if you're some of the 40% in Australia who go week to week, who have no savings, that would drastically affect you. And that doesn't mean that we have to do it, without any doubt. But I wonder, we came from the plains of Africa, and I'm told we learnt to react to immediate threats. We haven't evolved to react to a threat that is in the distance, and that's why, as a group, we haven't really done much about climate change. But if some catastrophe occurs, I think you'll find that people will do something very quickly about fixing it. The beaut thing is, there's 5,000 times more energy from the sun every day than we use even at our wasteful selves at the moment. So there's no doubt we can go renewable, but it's going to cost money, and that's why we haven't done it. Yep.
Another question? Will Tuck?
I'm Will Tuck from Save Our Council's Coalition. Dick, I'd like to talk to you about the 2.1 million people that the state government wants to put into our state just to call ourselves the #1 state. That's the first thing. The second thing is they are completely cancelling their integration with the country. The country towns are dying because of council amalgamations, and they're also not, they don't have train transport, and they don't have the infrastructure that this state government should be giving them. They're putting it all into roads and making this city bigger and bigger and bigger.
I'll tell you why, because our economic system is a type of Ponzi scheme. And if you don't have perpetual growth, it will collapse, it will go into recession. And I don't know how you solve that. Zan here has done a paper. He's a bright young bloke who's recently worked for the Leader of the Opposition, and he has explained to me that it's all involved in our banking system. You might want to ask him a question about it, but it's the fact that when we borrow money from our banks, he tells me, and lots of people verify it, they don't actually have the money. They sort of just loan it into existence. And that means, in effect, you have to have inbuilt inflation and inbuilt growth, or the whole system collapses. And so our politicians are terrified, because if they don't have growth, we'll go into recession and then depression. And that's why they've got this vast immigration going on. It's covering up. It's an illusion that you've got growth, but the figures show that per head we're going backwards. And you've got a politician like Will Burke who's got a policy of living in balance and sustainability and so forth. No one votes for him. So that's a fascinating one. As I mentioned to you, the Greens themselves don't really have a population policy. I think I said, Bob Brown said, oh, we'd be declared racist. It's ridiculous. I mean, I'm not racist, but I understand you have to live in balance, and we can help a certain number of people for humanitarian reasons, but the 10 million or so genuine refugees, if we brought 10 million here with a 24 million population, there wouldn't be food for everyone. It would be a disaster. So you have to do it slowly. One of my policies is we should be spending more money in educating women overseas, and so they're empowered in relation to the number of kids they have. And very quickly they make sensible decisions. Women, don't they, women? Yeah. Yes.
Brian Halstead, this time Sustainable Australia. Yes, we are struggling. I just wonder, on the Greater Sydney Planning Commission, is it possible for the communities, through their councils, to reject the forecasts that Lucy Turnbull and the Greater Sydney Planning Commission are foistering on us? Can we say, no, we don't want that number of houses and we don't want that population?
It's the amazing thing is, you'd think so, but both political parties that you vote for are pro-growth. And when I ran those ads, which cost me $50,000, and they went in the Australian, the Financial Review, the Sydney Morning Herald, the Telegraph, asking Lucy Turnbull what your plan is, I thought for sure she'll answer. She'll get on the air and say, Dick Smith's wrong, there's plenty of room or something. She said nothing. Then not one journalist confronted her. So I then put out a press release, $5,000 reward. Sent it to every newspaper, $5,000 for any journalist who can get some comment from Lucy Turnbull saying no comment, I'd pay the $5,000. Nothing, not one column inch appeared.
Dick, we asked her to come tonight, but I'm sorry she was over.
Couldn't make it. Now, isn't that amazing about our media? The greatest pro-growth people are the ABC. It's amazing. I've said to the ABC, why are you so pro-growth? It's all this racism thing. Oh, if you're going to doubt growth, you'd have to be talking about immigration. Oh, that's touching on racism, which is crap. So this is the most amazing thing. When I walk around, 8 out of 10 people that I talk to will say, Dick, the most important thing is what you're saying about population and living in balance and so forth. You'd think that would be reflected by one of our political parties. It isn't. The Greens don't have a population policy. As I mentioned at the start of this talk, every Aussie family has a population policy. Nobody has 20 kids. Everyone has a population policy. Does our country have one? No. Just endless growth, no plans. I said to Lucy Turnbull, when do we stop with Sydney? Is it 80 million, 800 million? No, no comment. And can you imagine, not one journalist forced her, did a doorstop and said, well, you've got to answer this. She got away with it. And so that's the amazing thing to me, that there's not a group of journalists who say, look, this Dick Smith is answering an important question that people want to know an answer to. No, so it's pretty difficult.
Yes.
So Dick, John Weir, resident. What are your views on foreign investment and the fact that we're actually selling the country?
Yeah, well, my views are that we're crazy. We should welcome, I've often said it, and I've heard Alan Jones repeating it. I've said, look, if you're a wealthy Chinaman and you want to come here with your wife and your kids and go and live in Dubbo and your wife can become a member of the Country Women's Association, you join the Bushfire Brigade and you buy a farm, you're welcome. But to have, especially the Chinese government owning our land, is just ridiculous. I can't buy land in China. See, why do we have borders? They're for self-interest. I remember talking to Bob Brown once again and he said, oh, we've got to try and make them fair. I said, it's impossible, Bob. I said, borders are about being unfair. But every country has a border. The poorest country on earth is probably Bangladesh. I can't go there without a passport. I'll be locked up and sent out. Every country has borders. And to me, what we're doing by selling our country off, it might only be 8 or 10%, but it's the best 8 or 10%. When I sold Dick Smith Electronics, because I didn't want the growth and I had enough money, I bought some office buildings. And after a while, people came along and they offered really good money for some of my buildings. Oh, I sold them. Then I realised after a while I'd sold all the good buildings and I had the duds. That's what we're doing to our country. The good properties, that beautiful wool north in Tasmania, I did ads in Tasmania to try and stop the Chinese from buying it. The lady down there, I've just forgotten her name, she was going to buy it, but the Chinese owned wool north, the best dairy land in the world. And so we're absolutely crazy. If someone wants to come and take risk and start a business like Ford or Holden or someone like that, I think they should be welcomed. But just to buy our land, and now I hear they're going to be shipping this livestock off, not even having value adding here. We're just crazy, absolutely crazy. But the parties need to do that, because to try and balance the payments, you sell off capital to balance the fact that we buy so much electronic junk from China when we don't really need it. Yep.
How are you going, Dick?
I'm okay, but I'm really worried that this is so negative. Yeah.
Don't worry.
Yeah.
I've got something positive.
Thank you.
Lucy Turnbull and the Greater Sydney Commission have this plan to grow Sydney. So I've drafted up a plan to protect Sydney
Brilliant.
based on protecting this area that we live in, which is receiving destructive growth.
I agree.
We have never received any environmental zoning in this area, and that the result is we're receiving multiple rezonings for development. So in this plan to protect Sydney, I'm trying to use an area called Hillview Heritage Conservation Area as a symbol of protecting Australian identity. And I'm hoping that people will support that. So my question is, how can we get Lucy Turnbull to come and see this area and see what is being lost?
I mean, Lucy Turnbull lives in a $50 million waterfront with beautiful harbour in front of her and lots of space and lots of ground for the grandkids to run in. Her kids won't be affected. And that's the sad thing about it. It's interesting, look at a town like Geneva. It has about 1 million people in it. Are they going to go to 4 million, then 5 million, then 10 million? No. Now, because they're not stupid, right? But we're going to go, is it 5 million in the Greater Sydney Basin now? I think it just hit 5 million, didn't it? Then presumably it's 10 million, but is there a plan to stop at 10? No. It's just endless growth until we end up like Shanghai and completely destroy the way of life as we know it in Australia today. And it's so basic. But I see what I don't... Normally you would have one political party that would be saying what I'm saying, and then people would vote for it. But both of them just spruik growth. Thank you. Both of them just spruik endless growth.
All right. Dick?
Thank you, Cathy.
Thank you. I'm just going to call on Janine Kitson to thank Dick and present him with a small gift as a token of appreciation for his talk tonight.
Thank you very much, Dick. We really appreciated your talk tonight. You were frank, you were eloquent, you spoke with a lot of common sense, and you showed us a social conscience, and that's a really valuable thing, a public figure to share with us tonight. We're folk, Friends of Ku-ring-gai's Environment. We've been fighting the overdevelopment and the growth of this beautiful area for over a decade, more than a decade. And we're frustrated because we're ignored. Just like you've accounted that you were ignored when you put these real issues to Lucy Turnbull saying about this perpetual growth that word that you said is left out. The perpetual is absent. So we're really grateful that you've come and shared that, because one of the real dangers that we're living in is that there's two types of communications. The one that the politicians are using, economic growth and all the jargon, and then there's another reality that they just dismiss, they ignore. And for you to articulate what you've said tonight resonates with all of us here and the frustration that we feel, but also gives us hope that we continually have to keep putting these issues on the table if we really want to make effective change to protect the very special place that we live in Ku-ring-gai. So thank you so much
It's a pleasure.
for your very wonderful talk.
Oh, thank you. It was my pleasure. You're very kind. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you.